My name is Catherine Miller, 33 years old, born in the small town of Hartfield, Ohio, where endless cornfields stretch to the horizon and the factory whistle sounds like a morning bell. I'm the only child in a working-class family. My father worked in a steel mill for 30 years until his joints wore out, and my mother cleaned 3 houses at once just to pay the electric and water bills, and sometimes even the loan for the old car we all shared. The house we lived in had only one bedroom, a living room that doubled as my sleeping space, and a noisy old heater. In winter, I often slept in a coat because the windows didn't seal properly and the roof leaked every time the snow melted. But I was never ashamed. On the contrary, that life taught me to value every penny, every hour of hard work, and most of all, every fragile thread of hope I'd built for myself. I didn't go to college. After graduating high school, I waited tables by day and sold handmade crafts online at night. I didn't have a degree, but I had drive. Unfortunately, society tends to look at education before it sees the person. I met Nathaniel Brooks, Nate, when I was 19, at the coffee shop where I worked. He was a regular, always ordered a sugar-free latte and tipped generously. One day, he forgot his wallet. I gave him the coffee for free and joked, "Next time, pay double." He laughed, and from that day on, he came back every day, with his wallet and a steady gaze. We fell in love quickly. Nate saw me differently than anyone else. He didn't see the poor girl I was, the self-made, sharp-minded woman. He said I had a business brain, and he was right. But what Nate didn't tell me then was that he came from an entirely different world. A world of iron gates, luxury cars, and dinner parties with wine glasses on white linen tablecloths. His family lived in Windmere Hills, the upscale neighborhood in the northern part of the city. The first time I visited, his mother, Eleanor Brooks, looked me up and down like I was a stain on fine silk. Her makeup was flawless, her voice sharp, and her smile never reached her eyes. "Oh, you're Catherine? Nate's mentioned you. You work at a coffee shop, right?" I nodded and tried to smile. "Just for now. I also run a small business." She raised an eyebrow, her lips curving ever so slightly like she smelled something musty. "I see. And what do your parents do?" Her tone was neutral, but her eyes weighed me against a minimum wage chart. Answered firmly, "My dad works at a steel plant, my mom cleans houses." She gave a slight nod and looked away, as if my response had confirmed her assumption. Nate's father, Gerald Brooks, was different. Polite, quiet, and his eyes were a little warmer. Maybe because he'd built his real estate firm from nothing, as Nate once told me. But even though he didn't say anything rude, he also didn't step in when Eleanor made snide remarks behind my back all through that dinner. My son could choose anyone, a lawyer, a doctor, an investor, but he picked a girl who never even went to college. I overheard that as I was heading upstairs to get my coat. It wasn't directed at me, but it hit like a slap to the face. I didn't say anything, not because I was weak, but because I knew real victory wouldn't come from a comeback. It would come from becoming someone they never saw coming, someone impossible to ignore, no matter how hard they tried. After walking out of the Brooks' mansion that first night with what felt like a boulder on my chest, I knew exactly what I had to do. I couldn't change Eleanor Brooks' perception with words, but I could make her swallow every ounce of disdain through success. I left Hartfield at 22, carrying a suitcase of secondhand clothes and $2,400 saved from 3 years of late-night shifts at a coffee shop and selling handmade goods on Etsy. I rented a tiny room in East Elm, a working-class suburb outside Minneapolis. The space was just big enough for a mattress, a folding table, and an old laptop I bought from a local resale shop. Every morning, I worked as a barista at a donut shop. Every evening, I studied marketing, graphic design, and digital advertising through free online courses at the city library. I wasn't studying for a degree. I was studying to survive, to build something of my own. I launched my first online store at 24. Pine and Ember, a handcrafted soy wax candle brand using natural essential oils and recycled glass jars. I poured candles in my tiny kitchen, printed labels at the local coffee shop, and packaged every order by hand. I sold 37 orders that first month, mostly friends and social media contacts. In the second month, a small influencer reposted one of my products. Orders shot up to 300. I barely slept, packing orders past midnight, my hands blistered from constant exposure to hot wax. Then summer hit, and I lost everything. Nearly 200 candles melted in a shipping warehouse without proper temperature control. Customers returned them, negative reviews flooded the platform, and my seller account was restricted. I cried through the night, then dragged what remained of my inventory to the dumpster behind the apartment the next morning. That night, when Nate called, I said one sentence. I just threw away 3 months of sweat. He paused, then replied with the warm, steady voice I'll never forget. You didn't throw anything away, you just started learning how the game works. I failed, but I didn't quit. I used the money I had left, exactly $826, to launch a second project, Ash and Paper, a content design service for nail salons, spas, and small eateries in my neighborhood. I walked door to door with homemade flyers and handwritten pricing sheets. Most turned me down. Some smiled politely. Only 2 agreed to try. I did everything for free the first week, created posts, took product photos, edited visuals, wrote captions. 10 days in, one spa gained 46 new clients. That owner referred me to 2 others. Things finally started to move, but then a message changed everything. We regret to end our contract. Eleanor's niece feels you're undercutting the market. Hope you understand. At that moment, I didn't know who Eleanor's niece was. A few days later, I realized Eleanor Brooks was the patron of a competing luxury spa chain in town. She hadn't erased me from her radar. I was furious. But this time, I didn't cry. I rebranded, bought a professional domain, and stopped offering services to anyone connected to the Brooks social circle. I focused on places they'd never set foot, low-income neighborhoods, immigrant-owned diners, barbershops on forgotten streets. I told the stories of each small business owner, their beginnings, their hardships, and why customers should support them. I didn't use gimmicks, I used truth. Just 4 months later, I had 9 steady clients. Real people, real work, no connections, no sponsors, no fancy names. But they knew I worked for them, and they paid what I was worth. I'll never forget what a Cuban bakery owner told me one evening. Katrin, you don't need anyone to approve of you. You just need to make sure no one stands in your way. That's when I knew I wasn't doing this to prove something to my future mother-in-law. I was doing it to prove something to myself. I founded Blue Lantern Creative on a March night when the Minnesota wind still stung your face. No signage, no office, just a letter-sized sheet of paper with the words company name, a freshly opened bank account, and a desk pushed up against the window of my second-floor rental, overlooking a parking lot. The name Blue Lantern came from a childhood memory, the kerosene lantern my dad used during winter blackouts, placed in the middle of the dinner table, lighting up the whole room and making everything feel a little less scary. I wanted my company to offer that same light for overlooked brands, for small shops without a voice in a massive marketplace. It started with micro projects, rebuilding the Instagram for an Asian bakery, writing product descriptions for a Somali couple's homemade soap shop, creating a Facebook page for an independent bookstore that was on the verge of closing. No one paid much, but I approached every task as if it were $1 million contract. Then came the turning point because of one story. I told the story of Mr. Ramon, a cobbler who'd worked 45 years on the same street corner, where customers still called him the doctor of leather boots. The post was shared nearly 4,000 times in just 3 days. An international fashion brand reached out, offering to sponsor Mr. Ramon's expansion on the condition that I led the media campaign. I thought they had the wrong person, but no, they wanted the writer who moved thousands to tears over a pair of shoes. I went 48 hours without sleep preparing a pitch deck, campaign outline, content drafts, and a viral strategy. They signed a 6-figure contract. That was the turning point. I hired my first employee, Lauren, a design major fresh out of college, who worked from my kitchen table because we couldn't afford an office yet. We used a coffee shop for team meetings, the public library for brainstorming, and every wall in my apartment was covered with sticky notes like a strategy board from a global agency. By year two, we had 9 regular clients, including a natural grocery chain in Colorado, an organic food brand, and a nonprofit supporting immigrant women. I'll never forget our first big contract. A private hospital chain wanted to tell human stories instead of running cold commercials. I proposed using voices of recovered patients, treating physicians, and logistics staff. One video posted on social media reached 3.5 million views in just 2 weeks. I didn't just tell stories, I made people feel them. By the time I turned 30, Blue Lantern Creative was valued at over $12 million after its first funding round. I signed a lease for a 2-story glass office in downtown Minneapolis, hired 14 more team members, and started taking projects in Los Angeles, Chicago, and Seattle. For the grand opening of our new office, I flew my parents in from Hartfield. My father, the same man who once avoided buffet restaurants because he thought they were too fancy, stood silently at the 9th-floor window looking out over the city. He said nothing, but when he shook my hand, it trembled. Not from the cold, but from pride. I had stepped into a world I used to only see through the cracked screen of my phone. International brand summits, boardrooms with Fortune 500 CEOs, a nomination for top creative female entrepreneur under 35. And I did it without a college degree, without influential relatives, without a single dollar of family loans. I still remember the day I was featured in American Women in Business magazine. Nate bought 5 copies and framed one to display in the living room, even though I felt too shy to show it off. His mother, Eleanor, sent her first message after 3 years of silence. "Congratulations, you must be very busy, but you've built something real." I didn't reply, not out of bitterness, but because I no longer needed her approval to breathe. And when the local news station invited me to speak about my startup journey, I ended with one line that made the entire audience erupt into applause. They once called me undereducated, but your worth isn't in a diploma, it's in how people remember you after you've walked out of the room. I used to believe that once I became successful, all the gaps in my family would naturally close, but it turns out the ones who reach out their hands first are often the last to appreciate it. The Brooks family never truly acknowledged me as one of their own, even after I had been Nate's wife for 3 years. Eleanor still introduced me as Nathaniel's wife every time she met someone new, as if my name was something too unsophisticated to mention in the circles she desperately tried to stay in. At first, I didn't mind. My work consumed most of my time. But when the calls from Nate's family began to carry more and more requests, I started to see the other side of that silence. Grace, Nate's younger sister, had just finished her degree in art history at an expensive private college in Eastern Virginia. She graduated with over $130,000 in student loans and couldn't land a stable job for over a year. One evening, Nate said to me, "She's hitting a wall. Mom and Dad can't help. Maybe we?" I nodded, no hesitation. I told him to have Grace apply to the online graphic design program I had once funded for new hires with a full scholarship. I also quietly paid off her 3 largest loans to help restore her credit. Grace called me in tears. "You have no idea how grateful I am. I can't believe someone would do this for me." I smiled, but something inside me felt strange, because that same night, Eleanor texted Nate. "Don't let Grace become dependent on Catherine. She needs to learn independence." Not a single thank you, not one kind word. A few months later, Matthew, Nate's older brother, was diagnosed with a congenital heart condition that required immediate surgery. Insurance wouldn't cover all of it. Walter, my father-in-law, called Nate, voice cracking with emotion. We transferred $48,000 to the medical fund the very next morning. When Matthew was discharged, I visited the hospital and simply said, Family means no one should ever have to choose between life and money. Matthew hugged me awkwardly. It was the first time since I married into the family that he looked at me without hesitation. But the real shock came when I discovered I had been paying for the country club membership that Eleanor and Walter frequented. One day, while reviewing our financial statements for tax filing, I noticed a charge of $3,200 per quarter, automatically withdrawn from the secondary credit card linked to the joint account Nate and I shared. "What's this?" I asked during dinner. Nate glanced at it and frowned. "Oh, Dad mentioned they'd been cutting back after some investment losses. I didn't want them to give up their routine, so I had accounting set up an auto payment. You don't mind, right?" I didn't answer immediately. I just set down my silverware, dabbed my mouth, and looked at him. "I don't mind helping. I mind not being asked." Nate went silent. I knew he felt guilty. But that wasn't the only thing keeping me up that night. Eleanor had mocked me more times than I could count, saying I just make money from social media, that I lack a proper academic foundation, that a girl from Hartfield could never understand how high society works. And all that time, I had been the one quietly preserving her dignity, keeping her from losing her status over a country club membership. The next day, I canceled the autopay. Not because I couldn't afford it, but because I refused to keep playing the role of a silent bank for a family that never saw me as one of their own. That afternoon, Eleanor called, not to say thank you, not to check on me, but to deliver a line soaked in contempt. "I'm not sure why the membership payment was interrupted, but if you don't want us to feel embarrassed, you should continue doing the right thing." I responded with only one sentence. "I don't do kind things to save face for others. I do them for people who deserve it." Then I hung up. That was the first time I realized sometimes helping someone doesn't make you a better person in their eyes. It just makes them used to taking without respect. And I began to understand love doesn't mean unconditional sacrifice, especially not for those who see your kindness as default, not as a gift. I used to think that if I stayed quiet and kept trying, people would eventually see me for who I truly was. But some are born with filters of prejudice. No matter how brightly you shine, they'll still choose to see only shadows. Eleanor Brooks' 60th birthday was held at the upscale West Hill Grove Estates, where she rented out an entire lakeside Italian restaurant for the event. Nate and I arrived on time, just as the gold-embossed invitation had clearly requested. I wore a navy blue dress, elegant, modest, and respectful. I paired it with the first pair of high heels I ever bought after signing a deal with an international pharmaceutical company. Those heels were once a symbol of triumph. I didn't know they'd also be the last pair I wore while still tolerating it all. The dinner was formal. Everyone had assigned seating. I was placed next to a woman named Clara, one of Eleanor's private school friends. She sipped her wine and smiled sweetly. "You run some kind of, what is it, internet company?" I smiled politely. "I run Blue Lantern Creative. We specialize in media strategy and brand storytelling." "Oh, right, like writing stuff for Instagram?" I didn't even get the chance to reply before Eleanor spoke up from the center table, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Don't be fooled by those fancy modern titles, Clara. That's just what they call it now. It's really just freelancing online." Heads turned. Nate gave my hand a light tug under the table. I smiled. Not because I found it amusing, but because I had learned not to expose wounds in front of those who aimed for them. "Eleanor, I think you're misunderstanding. Blue Lantern has over 20 employees and contracts across the country. I'm sure plenty of corporations would love to freelance like that." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a bitter smirk. "Nathaniel, you're always good at defending your wife, but facts are facts." Dinner continued, but the air had soured. I tried to ignore it. I'd swallowed hundreds of comments like that over 5 years of marriage. But Eleanor had more to say. When the staff brought out the birthday cake and glasses were raised, she stepped forward, holding the microphone like she was giving a commencement speech. "Before we cut the cake, I'd like to thank everyone dear to me who's here tonight. Family is irreplaceable, and I am so lucky to have wonderful children, and those who've joined this family, even if not through the doors I would have chosen. A few people gave awkward laughs. She went on, "We all have pasts. Some of us were raised with proper education, learning how to behave, appreciate culture, and understand class. And some of us come from places where they can't even tell the difference between success and lucky breaks." I set down my glass. Nate stood up sharply. "Mom, I think you should stop now." Eleanor didn't flinch. "Son, I've held my tongue for years, but tonight at my birthday party, I'm going to be clear. I never agreed with your choice of wife. She's not of the same class, not of the same values, and to me, money doesn't change that. Someone without foundation, no matter how much wealth, will always be garbage wrapped in fancy packaging." I heard every word. Garbage. No one said a thing. Even Walter lowered his head. Grace and Matthew looked away. Not one person stood up. I took out my phone and called an Uber. Nate grabbed my wrist. "Where are you going?" "I'll go with you." I looked at him, voice calm but icy. "No, this is your family. Stay and keep your silence." I turned and walked away, back straight, each step echoing on the marble floor. My heels didn't wobble, didn't falter, just like the dignity I held tight. That night, I didn't cry. I smiled when I walked into my penthouse, one I bought with blood, time, and endurance. I left Minneapolis on Monday morning on a direct flight to Palm Springs, California, a place where I had bought a vacation villa 2 years ago but had never once stepped foot in. It sat inside a gated community surrounded by red rock mountains, palm trees, and sunlight thick with the scent of desert air. No one knew I was going there except for my personal assistant and the operations director at Blue Lantern. I needed a space free from interference, no advice, no peacemaking, no voices trying to soften what needed to be confronted. I spent the first 3 days alone, no social media, no emails, no meetings, just me, the cool stone floors, wide glass doors, and a golden sky stretching all the way to the horizon. Nate called, I didn't answer. He texted, I only read. "I'm sorry, I really didn't know Mom would do that. I don't agree with her. I just didn't know how to react in front of the whole family." I closed the phone, not out of anger, but exhaustion. Exhausted from always being the bigger person, the patient one, the one who preserves everyone's dignity. On Wednesday night, Grace called. I picked up. "Catherine?" "Hi, Grace." Her voice trembled. I don't know what to say. "I didn't do anything. I'm sorry for staying silent." I sat down on the patio bench, watching the streetlights flicker between the palm leaves. Silence is a choice sometimes, Grace. But it comes with a price. I know, and I don't want to lose you. You're not losing me. I just don't want to stay in a place where my worth gets stepped on. Grace fell quiet, then spoke slowly. "Mom said she'll apologize." We smiled, soft as the desert breeze. "If that apology comes with a but, don't bother passing it along." The next morning, Nate showed up at my door. He wore a simple t-shirt, looked sleep-deprived, and quietly wheeled his suitcase into the house. "I didn't call ahead because I was afraid you'd say no. I still can say no." He looked around the villa, eyes lingering on its strange serenity. "This place, it feels like you, beautiful, quiet, and separate. That's why I chose it, to be myself without scrutiny." We sat on the front steps, iced tea in hand, not saying anything for the first 5 minutes. Finally, Nate spoke. "Mom said she'll call you." I don't need a phone call to excuse things. I need a concrete action that shows she understands the depth of what she did. He nodded, eyes dropping to his dust-covered sneakers. "I already told her that I won't attend another family dinner if I hear even one more degrading word, and that you won't be there until she apologizes and changes how she treats you." I looked at him for the first time in days. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." I set my glass down and pulled a folded piece of paper from my pocket. "These are my conditions. No invitations, no group messages, no apologies relayed through others. If she really wants to start over, she'll find a way. If not, I have nothing to lose. He took the paper and quietly folded it again. I'll deliver it myself. That evening, we had dinner together. No talk about his mother, no mention of the Brooks family. Just two people who once loved each other in a cramped apartment, now sitting under candlelight beneath a desert sky, trying to rediscover a peace they'd lost. And when he flew back to Minneapolis the next morning, I didn't walk him to the door. I just said one thing. I'm here, but not to hide. I'm here to see if people have the courage to step forward when there's no one left to shield them from the damage they've caused. 3 days after Nate returned to Minneapolis, he called me on FaceTime. This time, not from his office or home, but from a simple cream-colored room, softly lit with a whiteboard behind him that read North Bridge Therapy Group. Do you have 30 minutes? Nate asked, his voice a bit tense, but his eyes steady. I was surprised. That's a therapy room. I just finished my first session with Dr. Malcolm. I didn't say anything right away. Nate wasn't the type to open up easily to strangers, let alone a therapist. But the look in his eyes told me. This wasn't impulsive. This was intentional. I'm proud of you, I said slowly. From that week on, every Thursday night, I received a message from him. Just finished therapy, learned something new about myself. We started doing joint therapy sessions over Zoom, each lasting nearly an hour. Dr. Malcolm wasn't the gentle or predictable kind. He spoke plainly, didn't sugarcoat, but never judged. On the third week, he asked, Nathaniel, do you remember the last time you told your mother no? Nate fell silent. His cheek twitched. Then, slowly, he answered, probably when I was 17 and was forced to take piano instead of playing basketball. And since then, I guess I chose silence over confrontation. I listened and realized, in all the times I thought Nate sided with his mom, he actually sided with no one. He hid. In one session, Nate said something I never expected. You're stronger than I am, more than I ever admitted. I let my fear overpower justice in our marriage. I cried, not because it was sweet, but because it was true. A month later, Nate called from the Brooks residence. He was standing in the living room, camera pointed at Eleanor, who sat in a single chair, eyes cold. Walter stood next to her, hands clenched behind his back. Nate took a deep breath. Mom, this is the condition I mentioned. Either you apologize to Catherine, acknowledge your wrongdoing and commit to change, or don't expect me to come back. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. You're choosing a girl with no pedigree over the family that raised you for over 30 years? No, Nate answered firmly. I'm choosing the woman who built a life with me, a life you never understood because you were too busy looking down on it. A suffocating silence. Then Eleanor exhaled sharply, turned away, but said nothing else. Walter spoke up. Nate, bring Catherine back when you're ready. But don't push your mother right now. I'm not pushing anyone. I'm just choosing boundaries for myself. A few weeks later, Nate wrapped up work, stepped down from his role as financial advisor at his old firm, and officially joined Blue Lantern as our chief executive officer. I don't want to be the outsider anymore. I want to build with you, not just our marriage, our careers too. I agreed, but on one condition. He had to move to Palm Springs and live with me. Leave everything behind? No, we're just changing our foundation from endurance to choice. That month, Nate sold his old house and moved into the villa with me. For the first time in years, I saw him sleep without a laptop by the bed. We planted more lavender along the walkway, redesigned a shared home office, and walked under the palms every morning before starting the day. Blue Lantern grew quickly under our co-leadership. He had the strategic mind, I had the creative eye. We balanced. We trusted. When a magazine reporter asked Nate in a business profile what the hardest part of leaving his old career was, he answered plainly, letting go of the need to please my mother. Then he looked at me and added, but the best decision I ever made was choosing to stand beside this woman. Not behind her, not above her. I never needed my husband to be a hero. I just needed him to stop being someone else's shadow. 1 year after I walked out of Eleanor's birthday party, my life with Nate looked nothing like it used to. We never went back to Minneapolis. The villa in Palm Springs became our main home, a place far enough to avoid getting pulled into family drama, yet close enough for those who truly wanted to connect through kindness, not control. Blue Lantern opened 2 satellite offices, one in Denver, one in San Diego. Nate coordinated strategic planning from his office, while I continued leading the creative team and major brand campaigns. We shared everything: responsibility, profit, and decisions. Neither of us had to shrink so the other could shine. My mother, who had never been invited to the Brooks house, became a regular guest at ours. She visited at the end of each month, bringing jars of homemade jam and the dishes I grew up with. She called Nate the kindest son-in-law in America every time he gave up his seat, washed the dishes, or brewed her herbal tea just right. And Eleanor? She stayed silent for 6 months. No calls, no texts. Then, one Saturday morning, while I was tending to the ferns on our porch, my phone buzzed. The screen read, Eleanor Brooks. I stared at it for 10 seconds, then I hit decline. I no longer resented her, but I had no need to prove anything to her either. She may not have changed, but I had. A week later, Walter called. He asked to bring Eleanor by, not to reconcile, but to understand why we chose to walk away. I agreed, not because I wanted to forgive, but because I wanted them to see a version of me they had never truly seen, a woman who doesn't need to be accepted to have worth. Eleanor stepped out of the car in a pale beige linen dress, her face tense, but her gaze quieter than before. Walter gave me a gentle hug. She just nodded. We drank tea in the backyard, Nate grilled salmon, I made iced coffee. No one brought up the past until Eleanor said, "This place, it's not what I pictured for the two of you." I smiled, setting my glass down. "That's because you never thought I was good enough for him. You couldn't picture a future you didn't control." Eleanor didn't argue. She looked at me longer than usual, then said, "Maybe I was wrong." I didn't reply. I didn't need a long apology. I just needed to know she understood. As they were leaving, Eleanor paused at the gate, then turned around. "Catherine, if you can, forgive. I'm willing to start over." I answered calmly, "I'm not angry anymore. But forgiveness doesn't mean going back to how things were. If you truly want to start over, the first thing you need to understand is, I don't owe you another chance." Walter nodded, silently affirming. Eleanor didn't argue. She stepped into the car, and in the warm, dusky light, I saw, for the first time, she carried no pride. Maybe it was regret. Maybe it was loss. That night, Nate and I sat on the porch, under soft golden string lights. He set his wine glass down, took my hand. "Are you okay?" "Better than ever." "Me too. And I'm proud of you for not backing down." I looked at him. A year ago, he stood in the middle, torn between family and marriage. Now he stood firmly beside me, his position clear, even without words. I was no longer haunted by judgmental stares or soft-spoken words that cut like knives. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need to be just enough for anyone. Happiness doesn't come from being validated by others. Happiness comes from no longer shrinking yourself to stay in a room that was never meant for you. I stepped out, and now I stand in the space I chose, beside someone who chose me, unconditionally. I am Catherine Miller, and I no longer need to be invited into anyone's family, because I've built one where I am respected, loved, and fully myself from beginning to end. Catherine's story is proof that true happiness doesn't come from being accepted by others. It comes from having the courage to set boundaries and live by your own values. Though once belittled and treated unfairly within her own in-laws' family, she boldly walked away, built her career from the ground up, and found peace and kindness beside someone who truly stood by her. In real life, sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to fight, but to have the strength to let go of what no longer deserves you. What do you think about Catherine's journey? Would you have the courage to set boundaries like she did? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about life and family.